impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and to limit the terms of office for federal officials and members of Congress.
House Joint Resolution 5001, having had second readings of consideration for final passage, are there any remarks? Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members of the House, HJR 5001 is an application for proposing an amendment to the Constitution. I would like to share with you part of Article 5, and I quote, "The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution or on the application of legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes." Unquote. The founders of our country, who we give credit to their wisdom, wrote the Constitution, which includes Article 5. They knew from the history of past democracies that this democracy would, from time to time, have to be amended. They created a method for both the federal government and the states to safely amend the Constitution. They also knew from all past democracies that the federal government over time would expand in power and in influence. This has happened every time in every democracy. So in their wisdom, they placed Article 5 in the Constitution to give states a solution to rein in the federal government. There are safeguards in the way Article 5 is written. There are safeguards in the way our bill is written. There are safeguards in our judicial system and safeguards in the extreme requirement of ratification by 38 states before anything can be passed by the Convention of States and become part of the Constitution by adding an amendment. The only thing a Convention of States can do is make a proposal for an amendment to the Constitution. The only thing. I ask for your yes vote on HJR 5001, and let's go forward the way our Constitution tells us to do and begin to fix our federal government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and fellow members of the House.
Thank you very much. Further remarks in regard to HJR 5001, Representative Goodwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I bring you great news. Great news. Once this debate's over, we're not going to have to talk about this anymore this session. It seems like we're clearing our calendar, our emails, of all the high volume ones we've had, the last bill, and of course this one. So once it's over, nothing happens till next year. And I recommend, Mr. Speaker, if we do this next year, let's do it day one so we don't have to wait halfway through before we have to go through all this again. And I rise in opposition to this, and I do it in a very friendly way. The last speaker who sits to my right, we look at each other every day. We're actually really good friends. This is probably the only issue that we disagree on. And I congratulate him ahead of time before he even spoke, saying, I wish you the best. And he shook my hand too. And that's what's good about this body. We can disagree, but we can still be friends at the end of the day. There's a couple of reasons I'm against this. First off, we're going to talk about term limits. Well, let's mention term limits. How about the term limits we have right here in South Dakota? Do we really have term limits?
No.
Aren't there members of this body that had their 8 years in that are going to go over to the Senate or try to go over to the Senate? People from the Senate that have had their 8 years over there are going to come over here. And actually, if you really want to define term limits, it's the people that vote you in every time you come up for election. Now, if we take that to a federal level, we could argue that maybe because a U.S. Senator has such a huge war chest, how could one of us, members of this body or the Senate body, possibly go against them because, you know, we've seen the figures in the papers, how much money they have. So we could say that, well, maybe we should have term limits because of that. But let's just look at our state. Our U.S. congressman, he's a freshman. We need term limits for him. One of our senators, he's a freshman. We need term limits for him. That doesn't, neither one of them seem to be a problem. And our other senior senator, he's on the cusp of becoming the Senate Majority Leader. South Dakota, in a 30-year time span, could have the Senate Majority Leader in a state that's a welfare state. We get way more federal money than we send in. So for us to have a Majority Leader is unbelievable. A little old state like South Dakota. So do we really want term limits? I mean, I think we need to, I don't think that's a really critical issue at this point. The other one is fiscal restraints on the federal government. Now that's a broad statement. Now, we already passed, before I came to this body, my understanding in 2015 on the national debt. We passed this that we want to have a balanced budget and cut the deficit for the national debt to zero. So that's already been done. So what are we going to do about reining in the federal government? I mean, are we going to take the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and start messing with them? Are we going to pull the Second Amendment out? Maybe do something with that?
No.
We could take a more recent one. 100 years ago, we had the 19th Amendment. It was the right for women to vote. We're going to go back and mess with that one? I don't think we are. And the other thing that concerns me, if we do have this convention, is what's the weight of each state? Now, the first year I was here, I actually jumped on board. In fact, I was reminded of that today. Nobody forgets anything around this place. And I jumped on board because they convinced me that each state had an equal weight.
It does.
Meaning that if we had the same weight as California or New York or Texas, well, for little old South Dakota, that's a good deal. You know, California, if we use the Electoral College, for example, has 55 electoral votes. We have 3. I seriously doubt, seeing that it hasn't been determined yet, it's determined once the convention is called, what the weight of each state is. So I seriously doubt that California or Texas would probably vote like us, or New York, more of a liberal state, would give us the same weight as they have. So that's really a scary part. So we're going to be just a minute voice if we do have this convention of states. And that concerns me greatly. The other thing that concerns me is there's no track record here. We've never had a convention of states. So I can't tell you how it's going to go. Neither can the last representative that's prime sponsor of this bill. He can't tell you either. Nobody knows. But you kind of like decide you're going to play football. But we haven't decided how long the field is, how much the points are. Is the touchdown set 6 points or is it 10 points? We're going to kick the ball. We're just going to run it each time. You know, how long is the game going to last? We haven't decided that yet. Or do we want to do like that one when we passed the budget a few years ago and a couple other the big bills? You got to vote on it first to see what's in it. I don't think we want to go down there. Also, my understanding, there's only 15 out of the 50 states that have signed on, so it isn't like this is catching on real well. And in South Dakota, I read where they have 5,100 signatures for this. Well, they've been at the state fair, they've been at the county fairs, they've been all over. There's 884,000 people in South Dakota, so it isn't like everybody's on board with it. There's only 5,000 or 5,100 signatures. In the whole United States, out of 338 million people, they got 4.3 million signatures. Well, that isn't everybody's for it either. The last thing I'd just like to mention, and I come from a military background, I probably gave the oath of enlistment with your officer. You swear people that enlist in the military, you give them an oath of enlistment. So after you do that, you say it 1,000,000 times. And one of the main ingredients in that is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So, in my mind, and I'm not saying that I'm 100% right on that, but in my mind, and in my opinion, which I'm entitled to, I truly think that if I voted for this to have a convention of states, I'd be going against my oath of office. Because in my mind, we took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of South Dakota.
Keep speaking.
So why would we vote for something that we could open it up and slice and dice and paste when we even know what the rules are? So with that, I humbly tell you that I'm going to be voting against this Convention of States.
I knew
And I'm
that
tickled
before
to
you
death
even
that This is
started.
the last day that we have to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the remarks, Representative Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Yeah, we are seeing this resolution come before us today because this resolution is one of the most nationally consequential items that we deal with every year. I've been dealing with this now for, I believe this is my 7th year, because I do think it's that important, and it's important to the people of our state as well. It's my love for my country and my love for my neighbors that makes me want to put in the time, both to research all of the history behind this Article 5 power that we have, and also the proposition of getting together with the other states to reform the federal government. Every year we see this come back because the grassroots movement is growing year by year. And yes, this particular one has had only 15 states pass it in a very short period of time, but over the history of our country, there have been over 400 applications by states to have an Article 5 convention. In my remarks, I'm going to quote a few different authors here that I think help summarize some of the answers to the objections that we heard from the previous speaker. The biggest obstacle to a successful term limits convention will be policymakers and concerned citizens who believe that such a convention has the power to, quote, run away and open up the entire Constitution for revision. Under these wild scenarios, the Bill of Rights gets repealed and a tyranny is foisted upon the American people. Now, these fears have been seeded into many Americans' minds by groups like the John Birch Society and Eagle Forum. First, it's important to note that those who subscribe to runaway convention thinking are not less patriotic or doing so with wicked aims. Most of them do support the ideas that have been floated inside the Article 5 sphere, mainly restricting the power of the federal government. And our disagreement is simply on how to get there. After consulting with the top experts, we've concluded that the arguments for runaway convention are without merit and not supported by the evidence. There's historical precedent. Exhibit A in this discussion is America's very long and documented history of conventions. In the hundreds of state and interstate conventions that have taken place here in the founding era and beyond, none have ever gone away. On rare occasions, a delegate would suggest departing from the agenda, but that person would get nowhere because checks and balances were built in as they are here. A common meme on the internet is calling the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 a runaway based on poor scholarship. The narrative goes like this. Convention delegates only had the authority to amend the Articles of Confederation, America's first constitution, but they ignored that and threw the articles on the scrap heap. Hence it said they jumped over their boundaries and ran outside the law. In reality, though, 10 of the 12 state delegations at that convention had broad authority, which included the ability to adopt a new constitution, and this was made explicit by the instructions their states gave them. Now, Congress did recommend that the convention stay within a very limited scope, but it was merely advice because they weren't calling an Article 5 convention. They were calling it on their own authority. And I want to bring your attention to what I think is a very important use of Article 5 that was sort of alluded to by the previous speaker, who was worried that somehow, using this mechanism, we would lose the Bill of Rights. We would lose the Second Amendment. We would lose the First Amendment. I want to tell you a story. On November 20, 1788, the state of Virginia formally submitted the very first application for the Convention of States under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, just a year after the Constitution was actually adopted. During the Convention of 1787 and the ensuing years after ratification debates, there was strong argument made for including a Bill of Rights within the Constitution. During the convention, the delegates were mostly set against the inclusion of a Bill of Rights in the new Constitution, defeating efforts by George Mason to consider one. James Madison eventually became one who would promise that once the new government was set up, the Congress themselves would introduce amendments under its own Article 5 amendment proposal power. Now, today when elected officials make a promise, our first inclination is to laugh. But Madison, like the majority of the framers, was a man of integrity, and he'd make good on his promise. He was elected to the House of Representatives in that very first Congress, and he actually attempted to introduce the Bill of Rights almost immediately. But guess what? He was thwarted in his first two attempts. Now, eventually he succeeded in getting his concept for 12 amendments at least introduced. But at the same time, Virginia was not a state to sit back and wait. So on November 20th, 1788, Virginia was the very first state to exercise its new power to apply to Congress under the second Article 5 mode of proposing amendments. They applied to Congress for a convention of states to get the Bill of Rights passed. And George Mason, now a state legislator, realized that he needed to use this mechanism to hold Congress's feet to the fire and make them make good on their promise. So after this, finally the first Congress went to work to take up Madison's amended proposals and ended up passing them out of Congress with the required 2/3 vote and sent them out to the states for ratification in 1789. It's very instructive to note the language used by the state of Virginia in this very first Article 5 application. Today, many who oppose a convention of states disparagingly refer to the phrase convention of states as a modern invention in order to avoid using constitutional conventions. But scholarship matters here, especially when dealing with these matters of grave historic importance and national consequences. Below is an excerpt from the very first application for a convention of states under Article 5. The anxiety with which our countrymen press for the accomplishment of this important end will admit of delay. The slow forms of congressional discussion and recommendation, if indeed they should ever agree to any change, would we fear be less certain of success. Happily for their wishes, the Constitution hath presented an alternative by admitting submission to a convention of the states. That was from the first Article 5 application, when they named the Convention of the States, which is a meeting of states outlined underneath the Constitution. It's not an extra constitutional meeting that we're calling for. And interestingly, there have been over 400 applications for a convention of states under Article 5, but none of the states have ever achieved the 2/3 requirement. That's because the Congress understands that there has to be the same number of applications on the same topic. And that brings us to the historic effort by the Convention of States today. Never before in America's history has there been a coordinated effort nationwide to legislatively choreograph identical resolutions for state applications under Article 5. And today the 2/3 requirement equals 34 states, and we've passed in 15 states so far. The road ahead is difficult, but we and thousands of volunteers and supporters nationwide are up to the challenge. We find ourselves in a war of information over those that would put historical fallacies about the Philadelphia Convention being a runaway convention. So from history, we can see that the author of Article 5 itself, who attended the Constitutional Convention but did not sign it because it did not have the Bill of Rights, was able to use Article 5, the process we're talking about today, as a mechanism to obtain the very Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments that we enjoy today. This power we're talking about is given to state legislatures in Article 5. It's the only power given to state legislators in the United States Constitution. I think it's time we join together with the other states, exercise this power, and further the national conversation that it is the states who created the federal government, and it is the states who can reform the federal government. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I urge your passage of the resolution.
Thank you. Further remarks in regard to HJR 5001? Further remarks? Representative Kishke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, for all of you legislators here that are not in your first term, you've all been here before and heard these arguments. For all of you legislators here in your first term, this is kind of a new experience for you. I know we had this bill in the Senate last year, and you get a few emails there, but they never made it over here, so now we're having this discussion. So I know my first year we had this discussion in the House, and I've always had the faith to fallen on that this is something we need to do for an overreach of the federal government. But I just want to point out a couple things that have been said. One of the previous speakers who opposed it, he's tired of the emails and tired of the discussion going on. But he mentioned something about term limits in here. And term limits is something, we all have our own opinions on. And here in South Dakota, they are pretty loose for the most part. You're right, we can spend 8 years in the House, we can go to the Senate, spend 8 years. We can switch back and forth, it's pretty loose, right? But term limits is something that I've heard very loudly from my constituents that they want in the federal government. Now, really, if you think about it more, the election is really the neutralizer, right? I mean, if people elected to the House of Representatives out in Washington, D.C., if you don't think that they're doing a good job, then we have an election every 2 years. So that's really the neutralizer there. But really, for me, the problem is the U.S. Senate. And as a good representative from Lincoln pointed out a couple days ago, when we had the resolution about inviting our delegates to come speak to us, really the problem is that with the passage of the 17th Amendment back in 1917, that's really where we created this level of bureaucrats and level of non-accountability with our federal government. So, I mean, because before then, our state legislatures would send out our U.S. senators, and if they weren't doing a good job, our state legislatures would call them back and send somebody else. So, but now, they're out there for 6 years, and in a way, they kind of ignore us, if I please say my opinion. So, I think that that's really where the stem of the problem is. Now, so I want to say that we need to call this convention, and when we do, we need to have some kind of modification or ratification of the 17th Amendment, because without that, we're simply not going to fix the issue at hand. I also wanted to point out a little known fact, and this actually may be factual to a lot of you guys. If you look in the South Dakota Constitution, Article 3, or maybe it's Section 3, Article 32, and I will read this to you. Term limits for United States congressmen. Commencing with the 1992 election, no person may be elected to more than 2 consecutive terms in the United States Senate or more than 6 consecutive terms in the United States House of Representatives. So, the voters in 1992, when I was 10 years old, have already told us that they want term limits for our U.S. senators and our U.S. congressmen. So please take that into consideration in making this vote. Some of the obstacles that also have been presented about what's going to happen at the convention, how are we going to weight it? I honestly, I don't have all the answers to those issues. But I do know that we do have a federal government that is out of control, and this was the release valve that the founders put in the Constitution for us to take back to federal government. So I'm going to vote green. I urge you guys to do the same. But I understand that getting up in front of this body usually doesn't sway a lot of votes. I've learned that in my 4 years, so you guys vote your conscience.
Thank you very much. Further remarks? Representative Hammock? And maybe before you get started, I just want to make sure that we don't lose Governor Ferraro sneaking out to go somewhere else. He's up here to the left, but we'll hold our applause for a few minutes because I want to read a few things as he's here in the chamber. But I just want to make sure the Governor stuck around for a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very short. I have a copy or something that I picked up off of the Convention of States Facebook page in 2018, and I'll just read it to you. Inquiry from Rick, last name, I'm not sure I can pronounce it. Why not include an update to the Second Amendment in the Convention of States? Gun control advocates wear out the point that it was written when people only had muskets, so why not make it read the way we want it to read now? Response from the Convention of States person. It's called verification clause, Rick, and that's very much on the agenda of a number of the study groups that are currently being conducted on the country composed of COS project advocates and their state legislators.
What?
I understand about Facebook.
I didn't understand a bit of that, did you?
I don't feel like it's always tremendously accurate, but I've heard this thing said. The first time that I studied Article 5,
Okay.
Convention of States,
I don't know who it was, but on the official
1976.
COS page responded
And
to.
I have
Yes, that's something we're looking into.
represent a group of people that we all have interest in our government work.
Okay, got it.
And I've studied a lot over the years, and I still continue to have the same concerns about whether we really and truly control what happens in the Convention of States. I haven't been able to get over that, and yet I have had wonderful conversations with people in this House, and in those conversations I hear good, factual, earnest beliefs, and I still haven't been able to get over that.
It's because you don't want to, Mr. Hammond.
Convention of States. I'm going to vote against this. I'm going to vote red on it, and I'm not going to make a passionate plea to you. I just ask you to do what you believe and what you feel about where we can go with this and the risks that may be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further remarks? Representative Johnson.
Oh, him.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's some misunderstandings out there that really should be put to rest.
Yeah.
What does Article 5 of the Constitution actually say? The pertinent part is only 89 words long. Congress will call a convention
Yeah,
to
that
propose
is
amendments
the one that's
which,
against
for
us
all intents and
and
purposes,
gets all these people.
becomes
But
the
this
Constitution.
is him. He's in
There have
33.
been banners, there have been flyers, even transcribed committee testimony last Friday that said, where the statement was made on recording, you, as state legislatures, and only you, have the power to call a convention.
You do.
Members, Article 5 gives power to Congress to call the convention, not the legislatures, not the people, not my Aunt Minnie, Congress. Article 5 of the Constitution reserves exclusively to Congress the authority to call a constitutional convention, or euphemistically a convention of states, whatever you want to call it. And the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that Congress, under Article 5, reserves the power to deal with all subsidiary matters of detail regarding the convention. Also, under Article 5, the states have no constitutional authority whatsoever to establish or to predetermine the rules of order or the operational aspects, including matters regarding the delegates. But that isn't what our constituents are being told. That isn't what they're putting out there in the public. Article 5 explicitly states that the sole purpose of a constitutional convention of states is to propose amendments.
Lies.
The dictionary definition of amendment is change, to correct, or to alter. If you remember only one thing today, remember that the only purpose of an Article 5 constitutional convention is to change the Constitution. There are also claims out there that 38 state legislatures must ratify any proposed amendment. That's not true. If you read Article 5, it's very explicit on this. Congress chooses the ratification method, either the legislatures or the conventions. But Congress makes that decision. The legislature in no way, you and I in no way, are guaranteed a ratification vote. So we hear, well, this is a limited convention, you know. Folks, there's no such thing. Nothing in Article 5 limits the CONCON to any specific topic or list of topics. This resolution today says they're going to rein in the government They're going to impose restraints. They're going to limit the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government. But wait a minute here. Isn't that what our Bill of Rights does? Doesn't our Bill of Rights rein in and limit the power and jurisdiction of our government? Which one of those 10 Bills of Rights does the Convention of States lobby want to change? And remember, once Congress calls this constitutional convention, there are no do-overs.
It's not a constitutional
There's
convention.
no going back. James Madison, father of our Constitution, was brought up earlier. James Madison wrote in Federalist 43, he said that Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States should be used only for repairing, I'm reading, these are quotes, for repairing discovered constitutional faults or for the amendment of constitutional errors. What errors? What errors in our Constitution do the proponents want to change? This question has been asked repeatedly over the years. There has never been an answer from the Convention of States lobby. That question still hovers above us, folks. What is it about our Constitution that is so offensive that it must be altered? In this resolution today before you, on page 2, line 29, it says, by definition, votes are on the basis of one state, one vote. Well, I have to ask, by whose definition? It's not Article 5, and I'll guarantee you it's not in the Constitution. In fact, it's just flat false. Even the Convention of States says that that's not true.
And he's the one who's
Looking at
got
a
some of these
flyer
people so scared.
published by the Convention of States Action newsletter, on the back there's a section called Short Answers to Common Questions. The printed question is, how will voting be done at an Article 5 convention? The published printed answer, Article 5 does not specify.
That's because it doesn't.
One state, one
It's what's
vote,
been
by
practiced and
definition.
set in.
No.
Just
Now,
shut up,
The
Johnson.
last thing here, apparently there's a lot of legislators here that don't understand there is already a CON application on file in South Dakota.